Alrighty, welcome back to Nick Lenz's Comic Corner Classics as Young Classics. This is episode number 1417 and Doubleshot number 1313. This is the first of 7 straight comic corners I'm going to do today. Though yes, I'm also going to do 3 anime review videos. It'll be reviews for How Not the Seven Demon Lord, Shaman King, and 7 Deadly Sins. First, let's start with this comic order, because I got a lot of digital trades basically to go through, and one set of physical trades. Probably the physical one, probably in a couple episodes of this one. Alright, first up it is Superwoman! Volume 1, Who Killed Superwoman? This collects the first 7 issues of this ongoing series. 7 out of 18. Though here's the thing. The writer of this particular book is Phil Jimenez. He leads with issue 8. Unknown the reason for it, but he did have some really interesting ideas. Like, take for example, in this very story arc, this book collects the first 7 issues of this short-lived series. Now, the whole thing with Superwoman, I'm sure the idea has been floated around. My only guess is the reason why they did it is because it's a Batwoman series, so why not a Superwoman series? Though to start off with, in the very first issue, there are 2 people who have named Superwoman. You have post-Flashpoint Lois Lane and Lana Lang. The Lana Lang with the second issue becomes pretty much the main character of the series because Lois dies in the very first issue because they both got powers. This is probably some remains of from stuff related to Final Days of Superman. And this is by far a very interesting series. It's by far what a lot of the other supporting characters from the Superman books are up to. I mean, this book features Lex Luthor as a supporting character, which that's interesting. Probably because he's heavily featured in a lot of the Rebirth stuff for, like, Superman, so I want to feature him too here. I think he appeared in the case of Action Comics, he appeared in like a lot of the stuff for a lot of that one. This is the book he appeared in. We also have appearances by Lena Luther. You are thinking, Lena Luther, that name sounds very familiar. Yes, it's Lex's sister. She is pretty much the main villain of the storyline. We also have return of the Kryptonite Man, which that's interesting, given the fact last time this guy appeared was in the second arc of the Grant Morrison run for Action Comics. That was the last time he appeared in the comics. And the big mystery is, who killed Superwoman? Well, it's a bizarre Lois Lane. Well, basically the suit itself is based upon Ultra Woman from the Crime Syndicate. Yep. But they refer to it as they refer to it as Bizarress. That's what they refer to this woman as. She's a clone of Lois Lane. That's the simple gist of it. And a lot of the time we read these issues, basically after Lois dies, well, the post-Flashpoint Lois, this goes on for the first, 8 issues during Phil Jimenez's run. Though the whole idea of the 2 separate Loises, that pretty much is later retcon thanks to the events of Superman Reborn, which is an excellent storyline. Which with that one, basically you had pre-Flashpoint Superman, post-Flashpoint Superman, merged into one being, and kind of did the same thing with Lois. Yep. And we also have Steel, who's a guest star, who appears as a supporting character in the book, along with his niece Natasha, which is great. And it gives John Henry Irons something to do. He appears in pretty much all the issues of the series. And it's very heavily implied that him and Lana are married because Natasha first Lana as Aunt Lana. Now, their relationship kind of was, how should I put this? If you're curious though what writer came with this relationship, I believe this was started by Scott Lobdell, who started this relationship between Lana Lang and Steel, which is interesting to say the least because pre-Flashpoint, these two had no chemistry with each other before. As a matter of fact, they very rarely interacted. And I love the suit that Lana has. Now, here's the suit that, well, the one-shot appearance of post-Flashpoint Lois wore. Yeah, that's what she wore. Now, here's what Lana wore, which anybody can tell by looking at the costume. It's very heavily inspired by a combination of post-Flashpoint Superman and, like, a little bit of Red Superman. This is from pre-Flashpoint. Yeah, now, the artwork in this book is also by Phil Jimenez. As a matter of fact, he writes and draws this book, along with Emilia Labacaro, Jack Herbert, Joe Perito, Matt Storelli, and Ray McCarthy. The cover art is by Phil Jimenez and Steve Downer. Yeah, I mean, I love the stuff Rebirth did. My friend Edgar was not really a big fan of the Rebirth stuff because it pretty much is all nostalgia stuff. But in the case of Superman stuff, it was more like nostalgia from the 1990s. That's the simple just you have Steel here. You have some elements some people like from the 90s. That's similar to what it is. Batman, meanwhile, feels like a continuation of what Scott Snyder started. Superman feels like a complete rebirth for him. Where, like, in the main book and in the Action Comics, where it's been simply pre-Flashpoint Superman, along with pre-Flashpoint Lois Lane, along with their son John, who later gets his own spin-off title, with Damian Wayne. But this is focused on Lana, which they also explore in these issues, I believe so. Now, Lex himself is briefly captured by his own sister, who becomes Ultra Woman, which, when I saw, I'm like, really, Jimenez? You made her Ultra Woman, the same name as the Earth 3 Wonder Woman. Yep. But for the opening story arc of this run, it is really good. I thoroughly enjoy this book, and I'm going to give this book roughly a 9.5 out of 10. It's really good. Alright, next up is Superwoman, Volume 2, Rediscovery. Now, this book contains issues 8 through 12. It's not as big as numbers, so let's take the first trade. Oh, here's something you might find quite interesting though when it comes to trades for Rebirth that collects 7 issues. That was one of 2 I can think of that did do that. The only other trade I've seen that did that was the first trade that collect the issues from the current one with Flash. Yeah, the current run, the one that was started by Josh Williamson back in 2016. That's the only one I could think of where in the very first trade, it collects the first 7 issues of the series. This one, 8 through 12. 8 is a tie-in to Superman Reborn, where Lana finds out what happened during a particular storyline. Excuse me, that's the big gist of it. Also, we have this thing related to this character named Skyhook. He's been pretty much a character associated with Natasha and her father, who is John Iron's brother. Yeah, and Phil Jimenez simply writes himself out of the series. And if you're curious, though, who does the remainder, like the last 10 issues of the series? It's Kay Perkins. Now, this guy would not only write the last 10 issues of Superwoman, he would also write some issues of Superman during a period of time where Peter Tomasi was the regular writer for the book, and Kay Perkins was brought in as a fill-in writer. The guy is not a terrible writer. Though in the case of this particular one, it's mostly what deal with the character Skyhook. It's mostly deal with that and, of course, stuff with Rebirth. Yeah, that's the simple gist of basically, and, well, also deal with the aftermath of the very first story arc. In the issue 8 simply just a wrap-up issue. You can kind of, in a way, see it as Phil Jimenez wrapping up all loose threads related to his run. They'll keep me some interesting things here and there. One thing I should mention, though, is that beginning with this one, it started a loose storyline. I'll continue briefly, even into Kay Perkins' run, of Atomic Skull working for the Metropolis Police Department. Yes, Atomic Skull. We even had a brief guest appearance by Jim Harper, the Guardian, which, that was something. I did not expect him to show up here. Now, Atomic Skull himself basically becomes sort of someone who works under Maggie Sawyer and becomes simply her subordinate. And this lasts throughout some of Phil Jimenez's run, continues briefly into Kay Perkins' run, because for a few issues, he doesn't physically appear again to once issue 413 rolls around. He disappears for a few issues before popping up in the final issue, which I'll talk about that in the next review. And of course, the one thing I don't really get, though, is that, okay, if this is supposed to be Superman Reborn, because of the events of that, why the heck is Clark wearing the Jim Lee costume? Yeah, there's no reason for it at all. He should be wearing the Rebirth costume, not the Jim Lee costume, because the collar, that's all I can tell with the Jim Lee costume. Of course, the lions are there. And simply put, just Lois basically finding out about, well, what happened the first arc for this series, and of course, basically, Lana finding out what happened in the Superman books, which is quite interesting. I love it. Now, with issue number, of course, yeah, and basically, issue 9 is another standalone issue, whereas basically, it just, well, Atomic Skull getting a debriefing. about, well, yeah, he gets briefing to basically the officers there about several criminals who basically broke out. Yeah, and basically he does. It's written though he does respect Captain Sawyer. I mean, he's not touching her because, well, his touch is deadly. But yeah, he basically is somewhat grudgingly, but it seems like he's accepting her. Though with issue number 9, it started this thing where Lana and John Henry are basically fighting now, and then now we have Superman basically back in the Rebirth costume. I mean, look closely at it. Yeah, it's the Rebirth costume. Yeah, it's the Rebirth costume. Yeah, it's kind of weird though, where in the previous issue, where in issue number 8, where you have Superman wearing the Jim Lee costume. Here he's wearing, I believe it's Patrick Gleason who was one who designed the Rebirth costume. I believe it was. You have them basically have a chat, and oh yeah, because of the fact the two timelines merged, and she pretty much has to deal with ramifications of that. And of course, well, also deal with the character Skyhook, and basically improving their friendship. Though it kind of starts as, and of course, then issue 10 finally starts a brand new storyline called Rediscovery. This lasts for 3 issues, and it's simply, well, Lana dealing with the character Skyhook. And this lasts for pretty much the remainder of this trade, and all dealing with the fact that our powers may be disappearing. Yeah, this is a common thread that will last for pretty much the rest of the series. Yep. And Atomic Skull himself basically also makes himself very useful. I like the idea of Atomic Skull becoming a good guy. That's something quite interesting. Though they had it where I think it was Williamson himself decided to have the character die in the very first issue of the revived Batman Superman series just a couple years. I think it was just a couple years, 2 years ago. Just was. Yep. And by the end of the storyline, Skyhook is pretty much taken care of. Yep. Yeah. So, yeah, by the end of this, basically, Skyhook is taken care of. And that's that. It almost seems as though at the end of it, it's like something new, but not exactly per se. But I'm going to give Superwoman Volume 2 Rediscovery a 9.5 out of 10. It's actually not that bad. It's a bit of a step down from the opening story arc, but that's basically where it is when it comes to that. Okay, so that's a particular review. Next review, more Superwoman, and this will be the final trade discussing for this one, and the final trade for Suicide Squad. You'll find out why I'm talking about that. Well, I'll talk about the reason for this particular one in the next comic corner. Okay, so next video. Bye.